Good morning again. It's a pleasure to meet a lot of young faces and a lot of new faces, of course. It's always good to meet people. Uh, I'm going to share with you today something that I'm deeply passionate about, the emerging trends in gaming. But before that, before we start with that, let me give you a little background about who I am, what I've done, and basically what is driving me and why am I excited to present this topic with you today. So I'm Saikat. I lead the mergers and acquisitions and strategy function at Nazara Technologies. I have been with Clue Mobiles, basically a part of EA Mobile now. With Garena, looking after strategy and operations, corporate development, M&A, product strategy, user acquisition, portfolio allocation, and a bunch of things basically that comes with a corporate setup. At Nazara, we are very excited to explore the horizons of the gaming industry. We have always been at the forefront, be it IPO, be it launching of esports as a genre when it was exceptionally new, partnering with companies such as Kidopia to sort of revamp their overall kids gaming strategy from a $2.5 million when we acquired to now $25 million. So I'm really excited to partner, to be at Nazara Technologies and lead it from the ground up. Now, without wasting much time, let me start with the topic at hand today, the emerging trends in gaming. Gaming is always an exciting field, of course, and it has been true for a couple of years now that gaming today is more than movies, music, books combined. If you look at the stats, it's just amazing how much scale the gaming industry has today on a worldwide level, right? I mean, even if we do the stacking of all the three, it is not touching the gaming industry vertical by any means whatsoever. And this includes, by the way, all the publishing, the traditional, the retail, everything in the books side, on the music side, on the movies side, distribution. So it's a mammoth industry, all the three included together, but gaming is dominating them. Having said that, let's take a look at the stats on how we can split the revenues into PC, mobile, and console. Right? We have all heard that mobile is the next behemoth in gaming. Mobile today is occupying $92 billion of the $184 billion overall gaming market, which is roughly 50% of overall market. PC and console combined is another balanced 50%, with PC taking the bottom half at 38 billion and console at 52 billion, which is 28%. Having said that, let's take a look at the overall markets. China and US combined today occupy 50% of overall global gaming market. So these two geographies are by far the biggest geographies to target and make your games for. And we'll show in a couple of slides later how the preferences in these two geographies are vastly different when it comes to various platforms, right? But having said that, the other key markets are Japan, South Korea, Germany, UK, France. India today stands very close in terms of revenues with Brazil, but the number of players that we have today is exceptionally high. Eventually, what we feel is that because India has been piloted or been at the forefront at the gaming with the free-to-play revolution and with mobile revolution in India, we have not seen the premium games, and people are generally not willing to pay for games, but that is gradually changing with new players coming onto the ecosystem, and eventually we believe India will dominate and be in the top 5 markets globally. Talking about more trends, 2022 is the year where we saw a slight dip in the overall revenues when it comes to gaming. This dip was primarily observed in terms of mobile dip primarily. Now there are a couple of reasons why we observed the dip in revenues for the very first time in mobile free-to-play industry. Some of them are the macro environments, the interest rates going up, the wars upon us, and therefore a lot of the companies were finding it difficult to raise funds, and they were optimizing it for the bottom line, and therefore they were not spending aggressively on user acquisition, community creation, and all that other things. And that's the reason why you would have seen this small dip. The IDFA deprecation, which Apple introduced 1 year back, was not helping at all either, right? We were not able to target users in Apple ecosystem, which was the dominant player in the US market when it comes to mobile, and therefore it was not helping at all. And 2022 was also the first year after the full impact of COVID. So 2021 also we saw some lockdowns in the Western geographies, shelter in places were in effect. And 2022 was the first year where there were no lockdowns, no shelter in place in effect, and therefore people were busier than usual, and therefore playing a lot less games. Now, despite that dip, the ideal prediction before COVID was roughly around 130, 140 billion. So we are by far above that threshold, above that benchmark, and COVID has really given us that acceleration and acted as a catalyst to boost the revenues. On the second part, if you look at the dip in revenues is not at all correlated with the player base increase, right? We have seen the number of players overall globally in mobile increase, and across all the three platforms it has remained stable or increased, right? So that's always a good standing, and therefore we believe that gaming is in a very, very good and solid ground today. And next year is going to be great. I believe we achieved the 213 billion mark for the very first time, and 200 billion plus is something that we will achieve in 2023. These reports are taken from Newzoo, so definitely you should go and check out their reports. They are quite informative, and you can probably get more insights from those reports as well. Now diving to the PC and console market a little, right? If you look at the US market, it's 29 billion, and China market is 15 billion. Both of them combined roughly dominates around 33, 40% of over 45% of overall market in the PC domain, right? Again, very important geographies, both of them. If you look at the various monetization model, the premium model in PC and console is typically the one that is driving up more revenues. So if you look at console market, it's 52% for full game download, which is premium, and for PC it is 61%. But the other beautiful part of this graph is, if you look at the microtransactions, 32 and 31% respectively for console and PC, is basically the free-to-play mechanics getting adopted in the PC and console market as well, quite heavily. The next graph actually shows you the pace at which the free-to-play is actually getting adopted in PC and console market. So PC and console is for the very first time have been the laggards when it comes to mobile as a market. Some stats from 2022, 13 out of the top 20 PC and console titles were free-to-play, right? So that means a massive number of titles that are getting launched on PC and console today are actually on the free-to-play monetization model, right? Now jumping on to mobile market, on the mobile side of things, again, you can see the vast divide between the revenues. In 2022, so this data point is taken from Sensor Tower. They report in-app purchases only, so there's no ad revenues. And I've also included China as a market because there are many stores in Chinese markets, Android stores in China market, and therefore it's very difficult to track those markets. So the numbers that you're seeing here versus the numbers that you are seeing in the previous slide would be a little different for mobile. But in 2022, just to give you a broad estimate, US was 17 billion in net in-app purchase, Japan was 9, South Korea was 4. These are the three key markets in addition to China for mobile. And the rest of the world was standing at 17 billion. I want to take a couple of minutes to highlight the various difference between the genres which are different across the world. Now, in the Western market, if you look at the US demography for match genre games, the 2022 revenues was 3.3 billion roughly, but Japan, South Korea was contributing very minimal amount in the match genre, right? Similar is true for social casino as a genre as well. In 2022, while US accounted for 3.2 billion, the rest of the world was 1.8, and Japan, South Korea were nowhere to be seen, although they are significantly important market. So if you're developing a social casino game or a match game, you need to identify which are the genres that you should target, primarily Western audience or European audience, maybe North American audience, and therefore contextualize your product, your marketing, your user acquisition efforts, and a bunch of other things according to those markets. On the contrast, if you look at mobile players in the East, they're predominantly playing RPG, along with strategy games as well, but strategy is really popular in China, and China is something that I've not shown. So, but just to give you a broad highlight, in 2022, the US market overall RPG genre revenues were 2.6 billion on net IAP, 4.8 billion for Japan, which is significantly higher compared to the US market, almost double. 2.5, which is of similar scale in South Korea, although South Korea being a much smaller country in terms of number of players and bunch of other metrics, and rest of the world was 4.2 billion. Right? So it's extremely important. The idea for bringing out this slide is when you are designing a new game, it is extremely important for you to identify which geography or demography are you building this title for, and how do you target your audience, and what are the various product features that you should need to deploy for those audience spaces. Right? On the very first slide, I showed you how gaming is now equal to movies, books, music combined. Right? And I believe one of the important reasons why that is true is because gamers or game developers have always found a way to make the game development and player experience more democratic. If you look at the overall evolution of gaming, starting from arcade where you have to go to some place, pay, buy some time, and then play, to now getting the CDs and DVDs, purchasing them and playing at home at your own convenience, then adoption of handheld devices which made it more convenient, and then with the digital distribution on PC, console, and mobile, you were getting those games digitally distributed or bought at the convenience of your home, so that you are making it more democratic for the players to experience those games. And eventually with AR, VR, XR is about how to create more immersive experiences for the players. On one side, it was the player experience that it was always democratized, how to make the games more accessible, more feasible for the entire player base. The second leg was how to experiment with monetization models and deploy them effectively and faster than any other industry that has ever seen. If you look at books, movies, music, they are all relying still on digital, or maybe with the advent of OTT, some digital distribution is now taking place. But games have always been digital, since the time we remember, right? So we have always been at the forefront of adopting new technologies on how to distribute, how to monetize, how to give or democratize the overall game development ecosystem. And this basically forms the view of any new technology that I'm going to discuss next, right? How a new technology can actually help democratize the entire game development process and the entire game economies, right? The first technology that I want to basically discuss with you today is the generative AI technology, which I'm sure all of you would have heard, which is the advent of ChatGPT, Midjourney, Runway ML, and a bunch of other things, right? But I want to basically not highlight what can they do, but I want to highlight on how it can be successfully implemented, or in what way it can be implemented, so that it gives you a mental framework on what we can expect from games of future, right? Now, as we are aware that the quality triangle, the cost, time, and scope, basically dictates that we can optimize any two factors in this particular triangle and leave aside the third. So if we are optimizing for cost and scope, then the amount of time that is required to develop a game would be much higher, right? But if we are optimizing for time and scope, then the amount of money that we need to spend would be enormously high. So this is the cost, quality, time, scope triangle. And the way the generative AI is hitting at this triangle is it is immensely reducing the cost and time to produce a new game, right? Therefore, it enables the developers to enhance the scope of the game that they have been working on. Now, the scope enhancement can actually happen in two ways. The first way is to look at creating more in-game experiences, live services, mini games, and a bunch of other things centered around the core loop that you already have, and increase the refresh rate or increase the scrum cycles of your live ops development process and deploy those pipelines within the game, right? So that could be one way. The second way could be that small micro indie studios can now develop AAA games or AAA quality games. If not now, then eventually in some time they would be able to, and that's where I'm pretty excited, because players can now enjoy, even with small micro teams, 1, 2, 3, 4 developers, developers or teammates, they would be able to now create some AAA gaming experiences that otherwise they would be limited with because of very high budget requirements, high time constraints, etc. Right? So the actual imagination is how you deploy these pipelines into your game development process and effectively run those pipelines. Now, I want to discuss some aspects of generative AI and diving a little deeper because this is something which touches a lot of aspects of game design development process, right? So on one side of the game development cycle, you have the studio, which is actually developing the game itself, the players, and then the players becomes creators of some sense, eventually, which we used to call it as modders or hackers or a bunch of other things which created some fascinating games, including CS, Counter-Strike. So if you look at studio as a game development, studio as a game developer, then we started with no automation, right? We created the own backend engines, front-end systems, and a bunch of other things, right? And eventually, we got access to Unity, Unreal Engine, and a bunch of other platforms, which was the level 2. The level 3 was adoption of low-code, no-code technologies, which was the build box, and more recently Yahaha, etc. So these are the game engines that were being built, which was low-code, no-code. We are already in level 4 of this automation, wherein some developers have started using generative AI to develop some portions of their art pipeline, asset pipeline, content pipeline, and it is still human dependent. They have to do a lot of manual iterations and a bunch of other things, but still they have started using or deploying these art into their art pipelines. And the last part where we are tending towards on the level 5 of this automation is it will be highly generative, wherein you just need to draw some prompts and it will give you some very good customized art for your game to be directly deployed, and this will be completely automated. So there is no manual intervention, or very low manual intervention that will be required, right? I believe towards the end of this year, we will already be in that phase. Already with Stable Diffusion, ControlNet, and a bunch of other things, we are approaching in that direction. So very happy and excited. The studio as a creator will also be the first leg where this generative AI automation actually takes place, and we will reach level 5 first here, and then in any of the other verticals of the game development lifecycle. The second part is the game itself, right? Now, initially we had just static games. These are the games where players experience the same game across various players who are playing across their consoles, PC, and any platform basically. Level 2 is where we are when game as a content creator itself is the procedural content, right? Wherein you have some rule-based systems. Based on that, the players can actually experience various things in the game, and that will be tailor-made or custom. It is giving an illusion that the game is adapting to how the player is behaving or interacting with the game, but it is actually at the back end, it is actually rule-based systems that are in place. The level 3, level 4, and level 5 would ideally indicate the games that are adapting to the player needs and how the player is interacting within the game, and the game itself gets generated. So imagine you interacting with a game, you interacting with a particular character, and that character appears throughout the game at multiple verticals, versus another player which interacts with another character, his entire storyline, narratives, everything gets changed. And that happens live without adopting or deploying any code separately for these two branches of the game. The third and fourth, which is the player and creator, are joined at the very hip, because players themselves are creators, and then creators are, so by creators I mean, imagine like a Roblox developer, right? So you are playing the game as well as you are creating the game based on certain scripting languages and Lua for in this instance. So I'll basically take them together. So on first level, on the player and creator side, you have, on the creator side, there were only hackers that were modding the game, deploying the game, and these were typically the cheat codes and the cheat sheets era, right? Wherein the games typically did not allow users to make changes to those game core loops. It were the hackers with deep understanding of the systems, the architecture, and a bunch of other things were able to deploy these technologies and alter the core gaming loop. Again, limited creativity on the player side. The level 2 is the game provided tools which enabled the player as a content creator. Now, these were the systems in which you can create your own avatar, your own house, your own meta universes, etc. But you are still not basically these are not integrated within the core loop of the game, right? So players are themselves not creating games; they are just creating meta elements, which basically gives them some sense of attribution, some sense of endowment with the game, and therefore they are continuing for longer periods of time. The level 3 is where we are already. Level 3 is typically environment like Roblox, which is basically a platform with a scripting language. You still need to have some level of expertise to, play with that scripting environment, play with that universe, building meaningful experiences. But at the same time, it is vastly easy compared to the level 1 and level 2 mentioned earlier. Here, people are already building worlds. Roblox is anyways a giant mammoth in the kids entertainment industry and the kids entertainment industry. And they are enhancing their scope as well, starting from kids to now more into teens and eventually probably even adults. Level 5 is where I'm very excited about, is because you can imagine an environment wherein it can act like a YouTube or a TikTok, but for games. Anybody can create games, anybody can interact with the games. Modding will be a part of the core game loop, so content creation, universe building, bunch of other things, including the core loop modification, would be a part of the game loop. So this will be the truly democratic way in which the generative AI can help enable players and creators to create games in future. Speaking about creator, just taking a couple of seconds to highlight some of the UGC, user-generated content platforms that are already present and how they are thinking about these platforms. So on the vertical axis, you have verticalized and horizontal. What that means is, verticalized means that the same genre of games can be built around any game or a platform. In the horizontal side means that you can basically deploy a game or a platform to create different genre of games by using the same platform or the game, right? So on the top right corner, which is here, you can see that platforms like Roll20 can create same genre of games, but Roll20 itself is a platform-first technology, which means that it is a platform around which you can create card collectible games and tabletop CCG games and a bunch of other things that you can create. On the other end, on the bottom side, you can see Roblox is a great example of how a platform can enable you to create different genre of games centered around a similar audience or maybe even varied audience. On the left-hand side, on the bottom side, you can see games like Minecraft, wherein you have a central core loop, which is game first, and yet around that core loop, you can create different genre of games. So imagine worlds like mini games, wherein you have a core loop and you are developing various genre of games, maybe a puzzle game, maybe a match game, maybe a merge game, maybe a multiple other genre of games, maybe a customization game, and you're building around that core loop of game. And on the top left side, you can see how Skyrim, Halo 5, etc. can help you create games around the core loop itself, but the genre of the games typically that you end up creating are of the similar genre of the game itself, which basically enhances the gameplay loop. So this is how it's taken from Andreessen Horowitz. I definitely recommend you to go and visit their website, their blog posts, and take a deeper look at how the UGC elements are created and how you can leverage and how you can think about deploying AI to various UGC platforms already present. This is a reference slide. I have just created it to showcase what are the various platforms on the generative AI side that have already been deployed on the games, on the graphics, animations, world building, characters, audio, bunch of things, many tools people are started to deploy. Of course, don't you worry, I'll share this deck with you so that you can have a deeper look at a later stage as well. But what I would recommend is go to Product Hunt, go to Future Tools, go to easywithai.com, go to a bunch of these websites, continuously scour them to understand what are the various things that people are building. If you are deep enough into this technology, you should actually read white papers or research papers that are coming out. Based on that, immediately in the day or two, someone would come up with their own UI interface along with a product at the back end. But the good part is a bunch of these resources are open sourced, so you don't need to pay a dime. If you are experimenting with ControlNet and Stable Diffusion, you don't need to pay anything. But if you are using these tools, probably you need to pay a subscription fee, which is minimal today. Now, jumping our ship from the generative AI world to understand the landscape, and I know I'll split this room into two when I talk about real money skill-based gaming, but this is where I believe a lot of value can be unlocked for players. Now, there are a couple of things that I would want to highlight. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we saw the first decline in free-to-play revenues in 2022 over the previous years, across a decade probably. I mean, it is the first time that we have witnessed a decline in revenues from free-to-play. The real monies or a skill-based gaming or paid competitive gaming, whatever you may call it, they have registered actually a 45% growth in calendar year 22. And that growth is not led by India, the growth is led by the US. And there are multiple gaming companies, including Game Tacos, Avia Games, Papaya Games, and a bunch of other games that are operating out of India, which we are not aware of, that can help us unlock, in addition to the traditional Indian publishers as well, including Winzo, MPL, and a bunch of other players which are doing incredible and fabulous work, can also help game developers unlock additional revenue streams. If you look at the overall market trends, it is expected to, it is already occupying 10% of overall market today on a global mobile landscape. And it is being led by US, which is doing roughly around $3 billion today, closely followed by India at $1.5 billion. The next set of growth markets are Mexico, UK, and Germany. And I'm not talking about the betting and the gambling industry, which is really, really popular in, of course, the Europe and increasingly so in the US. These are purely paid competitive gaming, skill-based gaming, as we call it, or real money gaming that we call it. So this is an incredible trend. I believe this can be a great enabler for developers, small developers, to generate additional incremental revenue source. I don't want to split this room again, so I'll just jump to Web3 gaming in general. So Web3 in general, at the core of it, I don't want to again waste time in what happened, the entire mechanics, shenanigans, and a bunch of things that happened in the past. But I'll just give you the brief background and the history why Web3 games actually started, right? As a more like understanding what could happen with Web3 as a technology going forward. When we started initially with physical sales, right, where we distributed CDs, DVDs, ROMs, etc. to the players. The players can, and it was accompanied by a thriving reselling market. So players actually go to sell their products to other players. So there was a peer-to-peer marketplaces that were already established. With the digital sales era, the products were actually licensed. The players do not own anything in the game. They were licensed for personal use for a specific duration, and it is clearly written in end user license agreements, right? Okay. So the problem with that is it basically stopped the reselling marketplaces altogether. It's not that developers did not try the stopping of the reselling market in the physical era. They used emailers and keygens and a bunch of other things, but they could not stop it essentially. But with the digital sales, they could, and they did. The primary reason for not enabling marketplaces are threefold. One, scamming and illicit activities could be exceptionally high. They cannot protect the players who are actually payers. And they needed additional work for KYC and anti-money laundering policies across various governments, various countries, etc., which was not relevant for them. Some good examples here where Valve's Steam Marketplace actually enables the players to sell their assets, but they only issue Steam credits, which can be used only within the platform. So there's no cash out system that is available. It led to rise of gray markets, which is Telegram channels, WhatsApp channels, etc., even including some of the great Indian games that we play today have a very thriving gray markets wherein people can actually go pay some money to other players and use the social mechanics to purchase currencies. And then you have community-led marketplaces. I would really urge you to go and visit nukazon.com to see how communities can actually interact. Nukazon.com is a marketplace for services, for products, for Animal Crossing. How community can come into place and give a thriving reselling marketplace. So in order to enable peer-to-peer exchanges, now whether it is done by a centralized agency or a company, or it is done by a technology, does not really matter, but what is truly democratic in this particular sense is that players should own the assets and players should be able to trade or do whatever they want to do with those assets. So that's the core philosophy of Web3. Just quickly, 30 seconds, brushing up with transmedia, the emerging technologies again. So transmedia is a concept wherein you have one content that is launched in one format, the other content is launched in another format. So imagine Marvel movie. If one of those Marvel movies were launched in a PC console and the other one was actually launched as a series, the other one has launched as a movie, then that's a truly transmedia. It actually enables the players and the users experience content across various formats, interact with the content differently, and emerge with the storylines. One interesting example here is Cyberpunk Edge Runners. If you look at the September 22 data, the MAU shot up by 250 plus percentage points over the previous month. Edge Runner is an anime-style Netflix series that was launched in September. Prior to that, they were just seeing a decline in MAUs, and of course, Cyberpunk has been most controversial game as well. But with the launch of this anime, they have actually been able to reinvigorate the interest in the game again. So people actually went and downloaded the game, or new users actually got into the game. The second trend is IP adoption and adaptation. Mario Bros. became the highest grossing movie ever, and I've enjoyed Illumination movies, Despicable Me and Sing, etc. But still Mario Bros. Somehow emerged to be the #1 game. And we have seen this example multiple times with Rovio, Angry Birds, etc. The other trend that is emerging is cross-platform play. A bunch of studios are now trying to enter into both these genres. So they want to develop mobile games, they want to develop PC console games, probably the same game into multiple formats and how users can interact across different platforms. So that is definitely one trend that we are seeing. And of course, with the launch of Stumble Guys by Kitka Games and eventually acquisition by Scopely, we can very well see if you do not leverage the IP and the content that you have created already, someone else will take that advantage, and you cannot do anything about it as well. And the last is alternate platforms. I think Raji is a great example. I am really proud of those guys coming out of India, creating a world-class games, launching on Netflix. And then Hill Climb Racing more recently launched on Apple Arcade, which means that even though the games have been in the store for a very long period of time, you can still monetize them using some technologies or some other sources through Apple Arcade, Netflix, all these subscription services that are coming up. So to sum up, I think the market is looking good, 213 billion for calendar year 23. You need to identify the key trends before developing new games. Generative AI is going to be the next big thing, and UGC along with generative AI, I think, can create some really meaningful and interesting things in the gaming ecosystem. I would say always look out for the emerging trends in terms of cross-platform play, transmedia, IP adaptation, adoption, etc., and Web3 as well. That's it. I'm not sure if I overshot my time limit, but I'll just open the floor and lead Macha to.
Anybody for questions?
So you spoke about social casino games in Eastern markets.
Yeah.
So most Asian markets have strict regulations regarding gambling, and now with the EU also emerging with gambling laws, and even considering loot boxes are now considered gambling. What are your philosophies against these kinds of situations?
So social casino in effect is not gambling per se, because there is no money out. Right? Social casino games are free to play games. You can buy in-house currencies, you can play those games. So something like a bingo would be a social casino game. Something like a Black 29 would be a social casino game. Probably Teen Patti would be a social casino game, right? For India, Rummy would be a social casino game in some sense. So it could be a card game as well. So don't hold me to it. But I feel that social casino games are free-to-play games. They have a solid genre in and of themselves. With the rise of the gambling industry in the US, I think that social casino free-to-play games will see a decline, because why would a player pay to get the same experience that you could otherwise get playing the digital social casino that is already available to him as a consumer? So I think the trend is going to buck even for the US, but I don't think it is regulated in Japan, South Korea, China, bunch of other countries, because these are in effect non-cash out games.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
When you talk about democratization of assets, right, and allowing creators to create their own content and stuff like that, why?
Look, so there are multiple things. Why do you think YouTube opened their platform to create content for other content creators? So it enables, so there are a couple of things that happen as a part of it, right? One, you get a variety of assets. that are relevant for various pockets of societies. Now, your preference compared to mine could be very much different, and you need content creators to cater to those preferences at the niches as well, in addition to the masses. So I think that's one very good reason. Second is, I believe it helps us in creating an endowment effect for the players. If you have created something, if that is getting adopted and played by other players, that gives an immense sense of, a pride, a moment of glory for you as a gamer, as a player, to sort of play. So essentially, I mean, the reason I would say, to sum it up, I mean, in a nutshell, the reason probably why YouTube, TikTok, and a bunch of other social platforms created an open platform for other creators to create, that is exactly the reason why you would want to do that in games as well.